Okay, recording has started.
Hello, everyone. You are tuned in to the Arts Review Panel 2, which is panels with organizational names that start with F through Z. If you meant to attend the Arts Education Panel number 1 with orgs that start with A through E, that panel is on Zoom today. You can use the link bit.ly/Austin Arts Ed Grant. That's bit.ly/Austin Arts Ed Grant, all lowercase. That Zoom link is on the website, so if you follow that link, you will see the option to select panel 1. So if you did intend to be in panel 1, you can do so by going to the Cultural Arts Ed Grant page and selecting that panel on the website. For anyone watching here, I do also want to let you know how to adjust your view. To all panelists on your device, select Grid View up at the top right corner to find your layout options. And you can choose Grid View in the layout options so that you can see everyone speaking as opposed to just the highlighted view. Another thing is that attendees will be muted with video off for this webinar. A recording of this session will be shared online once it is available. But attendees will not have an opportunity to engage with any of the panelists during this panel review. If you have any questions about the panel, you can email us at culturalfunding@austintexas.gov. My name is Jesus Varela. I'm going to be your city facilitator. I'm a cultural funding specialist with the Cultural Arts Division. Assisting me here also is Peggy Ellithorpe, who will be your tech support and running our WebEx. In addition, we do have our third-party facilitator here, which is Jen Margulis. If you want to, I'm going to speak a little bit about yourself, please.
Sure, of course. Yeah, I'm Jen Margulies, pronounced she, her, and I am an independent consultant and an outside third-party facilitator here to just assist with facilitation and help everybody hold a focus today on equity. Thanks, Jesus.
Thank you, Jen. So again, as I mentioned, this is the Arts Education Relief Panel for applicants that start with F through Z. Panelists have reviewed all applications prior to today. They have tentatively made comments and scored them already. They may change their scores during this session, and scores will be finalized at the end of the day. We will be taking 10 minutes maximum per application. As we approach that deadline, I will be giving a 2-minute warning and also a 30-second warning so that people can wrap up their thoughts. If there are any tech issues during the panel review, I will stop the recording so it does not get into the 10-minute time frame. Panelists' comments won't repeat what has already been said. They are also not scoring on consensus and will not announce any numeric scores. They will be just providing overall application comments, and their comments should align with the review criteria. Excuse me. None of the comments should be the comments should be based on scores that are based on information listed within the rubric, unless they have firsthand experience in addition to that. But no hearsay and other types of information will be considered. They have been instructed to look beyond grantsmanship. And again, their firsthand experience and their own equity experience is okay. If a panelist has a conflict of interest, they will be asked to recuse themselves from the live review, and they will have their camera off and will not be reviewing or providing any type of comments during the review of that application. So with that said, I believe we're ready to begin. I'm going to go ahead and start the timer for our first application, and that application will be Jump On It. The primary for that is Lydia Nelson, and the secondary is Andre Bradford. So with Lydia, if you want to go ahead and begin.
Okay, thank you. Jump On It Community Outreach, per their application materials, seeks to unite youth and their families, specifically Black and Brown Austinites from low-income backgrounds, through entertainment, highlighting the arts, and sharing health and educational resources to prepare tomorrow's leaders. Since 2016, the organization's worked with young people to cultivate their talents and teach financial literacy, life skills, and character building, and break down systemic barriers to arts education and creative opportunities. Youth are mentored by college and professional athletes and community leaders. The application focuses on their Jump On It radio program, which began in 2018, that includes conducting artist interviews, producing podcasts, and creating an app. This application scored in the higher end of mid-range for me compared to the rubric. The organization offers flexible schedules, language interpretation like sign language and other languages, and accommodations for individuals with disabilities to ensure greater participation. The application notes that the organization involves Black and Brown youth in leadership positions and decision-making processes, but did not go into further detail. The application would have been strengthened for me with the inclusion of more specifics about program outcomes, key leadership, and particularly more details about their programs and events. The supporting documentation like videos, websites did help to elucidate more information about the organization. And I also recognize that the application form may not have prompted organizations to go deeper into describing specific programs. The application budget shared more of a bird's eye view of the areas where funding would go, like administration expenses, staff salaries, supplies, and operational and marketing costs and evaluation, but didn't drill down into specific percentages or figures. And one of the major portions of our rubric required evidence that at least 50% of the award would go toward teaching artists. And so I was looking for that while scoring against the rubric. Those are my comments about Jump on It.
Thank you, Lydia. Andre, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, thank you, Lydia. To me, it was very clear from the application that this organization has a very deep-rooted history in serving key constituencies that this application or this grant is looking for. I would echo that for me, it was a little unclear if the primary power in the organization was held by certain individuals of those key constituencies, and then as well the budget. While it did give some pretty good concepts, it was a little unclear as to what specifically those numbers might look like or how the funds would be allocated. So it made it a little difficult to gauge the accuracy of those numbers. So I wasn't able to score it as high.
Thank you, Andre. Comments from any of the other panelists? Okay, well, seeing none, panelists, you can finalize your scores.
And while they're finalizing their scores, I just want to make a quick reminder to anybody who might be watching that panelists have been instructed not to repeat comments. All panelists have reviewed all applications, and they'll be sharing their feedback if they have something to add that differs from what the primary and secondary reviewers have already mentioned.
Thank you, Jen. Okay, and want to just give me a thumbs up if you all submitted your final scores, and we'll move on to the next one. Okay, next is Red Salmon Arts. Primary on Red Salmon Arts will be Andre, and the secondary will be Samantha. And you can go ahead and begin.
All right, great. Red Salmon Arts is a nonprofit organization that was founded by an internationally renowned Chicano writer and East Austin Poet Laureate. The organization is a kind of a grassroots literary and cultural arts organization that advocates a vision of arts programming as an instrument for community empowerment and transformation. The application is for space rental, building maintenance, and safety equipment funds. And the application was very clear in its mission and key constituencies, as well as demonstrating a very strong cultural leadership that had very rich knowledge of serving those cultural constituencies with lived experience, a strong history. One of the areas I think the application could have improved is just a better understanding of how they're serving accessibility needs. It does appear that this organization does cater to that through some of the documentation presented, but through a lot of the language, it wasn't necessarily clear how those things came into like fruition. And the second thing I would say is just around budgetary mission and use. It's a little unclear specifically how this would focus on artists. A lot of what they mentioned in the budget was just around physical space, rental space, and then safety equipment. And so I wasn't able to score this as high just based on the rubric requirements of at least 50% of the funds being going to teaching artists.
Thank you, Andre. Samantha?
agree with Andre's comments. I would add for the budget as well, I didn't score it as high. And what would have improved it for me was there were no percentage or monetary allocations or indications of how the grant funding itself would be spent, in addition to the teaching artist component. But having even a general sense of how they would use the funds would have really helped provide clarity for me.
Thank you. Any other comments from other panelists? Okay, well, seeing none, I mean, go and finalize your scores. Okie dokie. And just let me know when you all are ready. Next up is Umlauf Sculpture Garden and Museum. The primary for this will be Samantha, and the secondary will be Allison. So whenever you're ready, you can begin, Samantha.
Thank you. Umlauf Sculpture Garden and Museum exhibits the work of Charles Umlauf. The project itself proposed for the grant supports their Shaping Space, which is an after-school program where they partner with AISD to provide arts education to elementary students, primarily attending Title I schools. What was really strong about this application to me is that their mission was really clear and what they intend to do. What would have provided more clarity, especially in regard to our rubric of serving key constituency groups, was knowing who they are serving outside of the broad scope of Title I schools. That specificity would is serving the organization's community in addition to these schools would have been really helpful. Also, with their key leadership, they provided information on their executive director and their accomplishments, which was really wonderful to hear. An area of improvement really would have been for me to know more about their connection to the community and the constituencies that they serve. Other board members or leadership decision makers was lacking in this response for me. So it was hard to get a clear sense of if their leadership and decision makers are reflective of the communities that they are serving or the students that they are working with. So that would have really helped in those areas.
Great. Okay. And Allison?
I echo that for me, a portion where I wasn't able to score as high and I could strengthen the application would be in more detail on the leadership. Only one person in the application was referenced, so just adding more. I also wasn't able to score as high for the mission and key constituents. I think more information about who you're actually serving and naming them would have strengthened the application. A strength for me was the budget. It was really clear and it painted a detailed picture and showed that half the money would be awarded to teaching artists. This for me scored in the mid-range.
Anybody else? Other comments that you have that differ from what we've heard already? Thank you, Sam and Allison. All right.
Okay, we'll see no more. If you can just finalize your scores. And next on the docket is Joshua's stage. And on Joshua's stage, Allison is the primary and Lydia will be the secondary. So Allison, whenever you're ready, let me know and we can start the clock.
Per the application, Joshua's stage seeks to enrich the lives of disability communities by providing the opportunity for each participant to demonstrate creativity, develop self-confidence, gain and maintain high self-esteem, and develop long-lasting relationships with individuals with similar needs in a warm and welcoming environment. And they do this through fine arts programs, performances, and exhibits. For me, the strength of this application was a lot in the accessibility. They mentioned that they were able to work with differently abled populations, and they provided clear examples of what they meant and details about what that looked like. I wasn't as able to score this one as high in regards to the project budget. In my opinion, the application would have been stronger if it really specifically showed that at least 50% was being awarded to teaching artists. They referenced a number that didn't meet that qualification, so I wasn't able to score that as high. And another place that I wasn't able to score as high was in regard to the cultural leadership. In relationship to the rubric, I felt like I awarded points based on some of the leadership having a deep understanding and not all or majority. And if majority were connected to the key constituents, clear writing to show that more of your leadership was in fact rooted in that community. And for those reasons, I awarded points for some, but that would be an area and improvement. So I scored this in the middle range.
Thank you, Allison. Lydia?
I concur with Allison's comments and feedback. This application also scored in the middle range according to the rubric. For me, I'd wish to learn more about specific teaching artists with maybe some brief bios and backgrounds. And the application documented that Joshua's stage serves constituency groups that experience institutional marginalization, but the mission and vision as described didn't show a specific focus on constituency groups that are at immediate risk of cultural erasure and displacement in Austin. And I also echo Allison's comment about the budget was very clear, but didn't indicate that 50% of the award would go towards teaching artists, which was a key component of our rubric. I also appreciated the documentation they submitted in the form of a video to help bring to life the work that they do.
Thank you, Allison and Lydia. Any other comments from other panelists? I do want to just remind anybody who may be listening of a couple things. One is that panelists have all been asked to score applications based on their own merits in reference to the funding guidelines and to the rubric that you hear people mentioning. They're not scored in comparison with one another. So the range that you hear people describing is the range in reference to the rubric. And I also do want to mention that funding priorities, of course, for this grant are there's primary scores awarded to applications that address constituencies that are at risk of cultural erasure and displacement. And then there is scoring that's suggested at a slightly lower level for constituencies who are experiencing other forms of marginalization, but not specifically cultural erasure or displacement. That's where those terms are coming from that you're hearing from the funding guidelines of the kind of two levels of funding priorities related to constituencies in this funding. That's it from me.
Thanks for that clarification, Jen. Okay, seeing no further comments, if you can just finalize your scores. And we'll be moving on to Lanaya West African Drum and Dance Ensemble. The primary on that one is Lydia, and the secondary will be Samantha. So Lydia, whenever you're ready, we can start the clock.
Thank you. Lanaya Drum and Dance is a Black-led organization that was formed in 2000 with the mission to expose and educate audiences to authentic and progressive interpretations of drum and dance of the African diaspora. In the Susu language, Lanaya means confidence, which in the application, the organization expresses that's what it strives to instill through their programming. The communities they serve include youth, families, and seniors with lived experience in communities of color, specifically Black, African, African-American, and Brown communities. And schools, for example, Title I schools in Austin ISD that serve a majority of students of color. This application scored in a higher range against the rubric for me, as it addressed all major components with details as required by the rubric, from details about their leadership to their services over time. The application addressed how, given Austin's affordability crisis, it's a common need for Lunaya to persevere to bring in high-level artists with lived experience in the Black diaspora and in these art forms. The organization partners with other organizations to expand their reach. I thought the application would have been strengthened with more specifics about accessibility efforts for the communities they serve. The application importantly addressed how members of the troupe with varied degrees of hearing loss have been able to participate, and I would have liked to have learned more about how the organization is ensuring full participation of audience members with disabilities, as well as more detailed specifics about the languages spoken by their performers and how those fluencies are incorporated into program design and performances. Those are my notes.
Thank you, Lydia. And Samantha, you're the secondary.
Thank you. I agree with Lydia's comments. This was also a very strong application for me. I did note that while the key staff that were identified had a wealth of knowledge about their art and community, I would have loved to have seen some additional information regarding how their board and or their artistic or educational advisors or leadership. I wanted some more information about people outside of their key staff. And how they are integrated into the organization and the work. That would have strengthened that portion a little bit for me as well.
Thank you, Lydia and Samantha. Other panelists, any comments that you have that differ from what we've heard so far? Additions?
Okay, well, seeing none, if you could just finalize your scores. And we will be moving on to India Fine Arts, Inc. For India Fine Arts, Inc., we have Samantha as the primary and Andre as the secondary. So Samantha, whenever you're ready, let us know and we can start the clock.
Great, thank you. So India Fine Arts is an organization centered around the understanding and appreciation for India's art and culture. They were established in 1995 to provide an environment of learning and appreciation of South Asian performing arts in Texas and to foster Indian culture among the younger generation of Indian Americans. For me, this application was fairly strong. I appreciated that the organization's mission is central to serving the community and providing programming to combat against the cultural erasure that they were seeing. Their specific programs and approaches were very detailed and helpful for me to know and learn more. Their leadership and staff were defined as well as in addition to how they intersect and represent the communities that they serve. I found that the additional details about the advisors and the partners that they work with were also helpful in understanding how they elevate decision makers and have that representation and reflection of the communities too. For me, certain aspects of improvement would have been that the budget allocation, as some have mentioned, would not seeing the 50% required for the teaching artists as indicated in the rubric. It was less than half, so I noted that as an area of improvement. I would also like to see some clarity around, they had event management as a budget line item that they would allocate some funds to, and just some further clarity there of what that might mean. Perhaps that is going for teaching artists or in some capacity, but that wasn't clear in their response. That would have helped that score in terms of budget.
Thank you, Samantha. Andre, do you have anything to add?
Definitely concur with a lot of what Samantha has said. I do appreciate that in the mission statements, part of the application, a clear distinction was made that while the South Asian and Indian population is growing in Austin, the culture specifically hasn't been prioritized, and that a lot of the mission of what they were trying to accomplish with this organization was geared towards bringing awareness to the arts and culture. I would also echo that the budget was an area I wasn't able to score higher on just because of the rubric not it wasn't very clear that the majority of the funds would go towards teaching artists.
Thank you, Samantha, and thank you, Andre. Do other panelists have any other perspectives, things you want to add? Okay, thank you.
Okay, panelists, if you just finalize your scores. Okay, and we are running quite fast ahead of schedule here, so we've actually reached our break according to our run of show. So I'm trying to think if we want to stay as close to our scheduled time as possible and maybe take an extended break so that we don't move past these before someone can get a chance to get them live. Just a second. For now, let's move forward to the next one. Okay, so the next application is the Baron's Man. And the primary on that is Andre, and the secondary will be Allison. Andre, whenever you're ready, we can begin.
Great. Let me make sure I'm unmuted. Okay, great. The Baron's Men, according to the application information, is a nonprofit resident repertory theater company with a focus on making historical works accessible. They have two main programs throughout the year, and they did mention that approximately 25% of their education groups are members of the BIPOC, the LGBTQIA plus community, and the economically disadvantaged communities. Their application is for primarily job creation for teaching artists. And I would say that a definite strength of this application for me was that they were very clear in what their funding was going to be used for, as well as some of the accessibility and language accessibility options for members attending their events. I would say that an area improvement for me in this application is that it wasn't necessarily super clear from the mission and the information provided that the communities that are at risk of erasure were central to their mission and their founding or their history. It does appear that programming evolved over time to serve those communities, but just from the information provided, it wasn't super clear that this was a central part of why they do what they do, and that they were accountable to these communities. And similarly, the leadership, it does show some very established qualifications and accomplishments, but it wasn't totally clear that there was a deep personal relationship to the affected communities or lived experience for the affected communities.
Thank you, Andre. And Allison, you're the secondary.
I agree with everything that Andres mentioned. The only place where I wasn't able to score as high would be in the language access and accommodations for non-English speaking. They cited a lot of like accessibility or accommodations, specifically referencing their curtain theater and like seating and their change one practices, but specifically for the language, they put none. And so I wasn't able to score that portion as high.
Thank you, Andre and Allison. Other reviewers have something else you'd like to add from your perspective, from your review? Again, we are asking folks just to share things that haven't already been touched on.
Okay, well, seeing none, if y'all can just finalize your scores for the Baron's Men. And the next application up will be Motion Media Arts Center, doing business as Austin School of Film. Panelists, you may note that in your review materials, it may just be listed as the Austin School of Film. This one, Allison is the primary, and Samantha will be the secondary. So Allison, whenever you're ready.
Motion Media Arts Center's mission is to support underrepresented people in the arts by offering artistic and professional development facilities, education, and exhibition opportunities with an emphasis on sustainable pathways in creative industries. They talk about how, as one of the few spaces left in East Austin run by BIPOC leaders, they have a profound comprehension of pressing danger of the cultural erasure through these lived experiences, and they are striving towards solutions that dismantle institutional marginalization in the arts. For me, this application, in reference to the rubric, scored really high. I found a strength was that in the cultural leadership section, they clearly depicted the leadership's connection to the community. They explicitly said that the executive director is born and raised in Austin, is an artist, is an educator. So they painted a real clear picture on the leadership's relationship to the key constituents. An area that I thought could be improved upon and that I wasn't able to score the highest was around the clarity and detail of the budget. If they referenced some percentages, but they didn't put clear dollar amounts, which left it a little bit unclear in my opinion, and that was the only area that I really wasn't able to score the highest.
Thank you, Allison. Samantha?
I agree with Allison's comments, and I also found this to be a very strong application. I really appreciated the supplemental materials and work samples that they uploaded as well. I agreed that an area of improvement where I wasn't able to score as high was the budget. Again, the percentage allocations were really helpful. However, there were no dollar amounts provided, and I also was seeking further clarification over it allocated, I believe, 35% towards their space at the Tillery location, but no specificity around what that meant and how those funds would be kind of implemented in services at that location itself.
Thank you very much. Other panelists, any comments that haven't already been addressed? Thanks for checking.
Okay, well, seeing none, if you can finalize your scores for Motion Media Arts Center. And we will be moving on to Latinitas Inc. next. And for Latinitas Inc., Lydia, it will be the primary, and Allison will be the secondary. So Lydia, whenever you're ready, we can start the timer.
Thank you. Since 2002, Latinitas offers culturally relevant, multi-generational STEAM education programs to empower girls and non-binary youth of color and their families, particularly those residing in underserved neighborhoods in East, Southeast, and Northeast Austin, to become innovators in media and technology. As expressed in their application, their mission is to empower youth of color to innovate through media, technology, and the creative arts, and combat structural inequities and harmful stereotypes that exclude Latinx youth and families from science and media. Latinitas annually reaches 3,000 youth and adult participants in Central Texas with after-school clubs, summer camps, coding certification programs, technology literacy programs, and one-day conferences. Their application focused on how Latinitas would like to use award funds to expand their media legacy and Media Chica program and curriculum into AISD schools during the school day and in after-school settings. This application scored in the high range for me, according to the rubric. 100% of their staff identify as Hispanic or Latinx and live in the neighborhoods they serve. Everyone on their board of directors is part of a BIPOC community. So they really have this lived experience in key constituency groups as part of our rubric. The response in the project budget section addressed how a majority of funds would go toward teaching artists' salaries, but the application would have been strengthened with the inclusion of more specific figures to see in detail how the award monies will be broken down. And those are my comments.
Thank you, Lydia. Allison?
I echo everything that Lydia has shared. The biggest strength for me was in the cultural leadership and how everybody identified a part of the key constituency. I also felt the strength of this application was the way that it directly addressed all of the questions, so it was fairly easy to score. And I echo the improvement that I would have liked to see a more detailed budget to have a clearer picture of where money was being spent and where it was going. So that was a place that I was unable to award the highest score.
Thank you, Lydia and Allison. Other comments? And I do want to make a reminder for anybody who is watching now or will watch the recorded version of this, that panelists, as Jesus mentioned at the beginning, have been asked in their reviews to not overemphasize grantsmanship and to really assess each application based on the information that is present in the application and not necessarily the ease or difficulty in finding it, with the understanding that the ability to write a really well put together grant can also touch on a lot of different equity issues. A reminder for our viewers.
Thank you, Jen. So if panelists would finalize their scores for Latinitas, I also do want to take this moment to remind anyone watching that this is the Arts Education panel for applicants that start with F through Z. So if you were intending to be watching the panel with applicants being reviewed that start with A through E, that's currently on Zoom, and you can find that at bit.ly/Austin Arts Ed Grant. That's bit.ly/Austin Arts Ed Grant, all together, lowercase. That will forward you to our Cultural Arts Division website. You already have that bookmarked. Even better, you will see the cultural funding, both of the panels links at the top of that page. So if you do intend to be watching the A through E, you can find that link there. Okay, moving on to the next applicant is Paramount and Stateside Theaters. And the primary for Paramount and Stateside Theaters will be Allison, and the secondary on that is Andre. So Allison, whenever you're ready to begin.
Per the written response, Paramount states that they connect people and strengthen community by showcasing unforgettable performances across genres, providing life-changing arts education programs, and dreaming up magical experiences in iconic venues that anchor and define downtown Austin. They also lead various educational programs through Paramount Education, which includes Story Wranglers, summer theater camps, student matinees, and access to tickets at free or reduced prices. This application for me, strength was consideration for accessibility. They stated that they had ASL interpreters for all events, and that Story Wranglers was a program that was available in English and Spanish, so they scored really high in the accessibility portion for me. A section that I wasn't able to award the highest score would be the budget. For me, it lacked clarity and details, and full points were not awarded because I didn't find that 50% of the awarded funds would be going to teaching artists. So an area would be for improvement be to clear that or bring more clarity to that. Another place that I wasn't able to award the highest score would be the cultural leadership. For me, it lacked sufficient detail. Great bios had been written about leadership, but it wasn't clearly rooted in how they reflected the lives or the experiences of their key constituencies. And so for that, I wasn't able to award the highest score. This for me scored in the mid-range based on the rubric.
Thank you, Allison. Andre?
Very similar to Allison. I thought that the application scored actually eventually fairly high. I had kind of scored it a little bit lower after first initially reading the mission statement. It was in the history and services where it kind of became clear to me that a lot of the some of the organizational initiatives were geared towards members of communities that are at risk of erasure. And I would also echo that for budget, there is a number provided, but it's kind of a larger overall figure, and so it's a little hard to kind of parse out what specifically is going to go towards teaching artists. And so I was only able to score that kind of in the mid-range just because it wasn't super clear that a big priority of the funds would be allocated to teaching artists and how specifically that would play out.
Thank you both. Any other comments, perspectives that haven't been shared so far? All right, thank you.
Okay, panelists, if you could just finalize your scores for Paramount and Stateside Theaters. And we will be moving on to the next applicant, which is Impact Arts. For Impact Arts, Andre is the primary and Lydia will be the secondary. So Andre, let me know when you're ready and we can start the clamor.
So Impact Arts is a nonprofit organization whose mission is in making outstanding artistic experiences accessible. They offer kind of two major programs that offer tuition-free, professional level musical and film training, and that benefits primarily members of the key constituencies that are sought after in this grant. The application is for funding to support free workshops to Title I middle and high schools, as well as funds to hire teaching artists for the programs. This application scored in the higher range for me. It was very clear from their mission statement, and they offered work samples that serving these communities were integral to the organization itself. The cultural leadership had lived experience with the communities that they were servicing, and accessibility and language were also key aspects of some of their programming and prioritizing that. So this application overall scored higher for me.
Thank you, Andre. Lydia, would you like to add?
Sure. So this application scored in the middle range, according to the rubric. For me, I felt that the organization's application shared well how they serve students in schools facing economic barriers with numerous programs. And an educational goal of the organization is to ensure that students don't pay to participate in professional quality programming. However, the application didn't show for me that serving and ensuring participation of key constituency groups at immediate risk of cultural erasure and displacement, as defined in our rubric, was central to the organization's mission and vision. I did appreciate how the supporting video documentation brought to life their programs like Musical Theater in a Box and Summer Stock Austin, that are two programs under the organization's umbrella. I thought the application would have been strengthened with more information like biographies about their teaching artists. They did share, I believe, some demographic information. I would have liked to have dug deeper a little bit into there. And I appreciated the extra information the organization offered in their budget section about how the audition process works and how they're thinking about removing barriers for preparing for auditions and portfolios. And I was eager to learn more about their supports and ties with Austin area schools to really parse out distinctions between offering programs to schools and then how those programs, once offered, are implemented and connected with students that are served.
Both, thank you, Andre and Lydia. Any other comments, perspectives, comments that you made in your review that you'd like to mention? Yeah, Allison.
I also scored this in the mid-range, and I just wanted to echo that for me, I didn't, something that could have been improved on was I didn't find languaging about how their mission was rooted in populations at immediate risk for cultural erasure or displacement. So that for me is where I wasn't able to award the highest points and why it scored in the mid-range.
Thanks for offering that comment, Allison. Any other thoughts or comments that you want to get out into this space? All right, thank you all.
Thank you, everyone. So if you could just finalize your scores for Impact Arts. And we will be moving on to Inside Out Steel Band. For Inside Out Steel Band, we have Samantha as the primary and Allison as the secondary. So Samantha, when you're ready to start.
Thank you. So Inside Out Steel Band is an organization that aims to create community through music. The proposed program's goal is to bring musical and cultural tradition of the Trinidadian steel pan art form to participating students. This organization has existed for over 25 years, presenting free and low-cost workshops, residencies, public performances throughout Austin that bring local student participants on stage with internationally recognized and professional musicians. In this way, they've brought the musical and cultural traditions of the Trinidad and Tobago in direct contact with the local youth in Austin. I found this application's strengths to be that their mission and vision were very clear and intentional. And I found that overall about their application. It was very focused, and I appreciated the detailed budget, allocating everything in that $25,000 request to teaching artists themselves and the implementation of the arts education program that they're proposing. The improvement that would have helped strengthen this application for me was that while they stated that they don't represent one specific community in Austin, that they work to bring programs to multiple communities throughout the area, and that the community being served itself holds power. That's such a powerful statement to have in an application, but for me, it was a little vague. I would have loved a little bit more clarity and specificity about how they approach that as a philosophy and implementation and leadership itself, or an example of how that plays out when they are kind of creating that as a leadership structure, just to ensure, again, that the leadership the organization and in the program is reflective of the community. A specific example in the structure that they're proposing would have helped strengthen that response for me.
Thank you, Samantha. And Allison?
I echo a lot of what Samantha said. For me, a strength was also in the accessibility score. They clearly showed how the organization partners with the School of the Blind and Visually Impaired to show that they do have accommodations or programmings for accessibility. I also felt like strength was in their language accommodation, even though they didn't explicitly state that. They said they don't have specific accommodations, but then they talked about their Spanish-speaking interpreters and performances that are majority in Spanish-speaking audiences. And so I found that a strength, even though right before they said it wasn't. They explicitly listed examples of what they're doing for language accessibility. For me, something that I didn't score the highest and that I think more details could be provided to enhance the score would be around leadership. There was only one person listed in the leadership section, and for improvement, I would suggest adding more individuals who are in leadership, who are teaching artists, or on the board to kind of show a range of who is working at your organization. In my comment, I said that no one person can represent a group of key constituencies, and so writing about a few more people who are in your organization to show how they directly relate to your key constituencies would be an area for improvement, specifically on that score.
Thank you both very much. Any other comments, perspectives that you had that you'd like to share? Again, distinct from what has already been said. Thank you.
Okay, panelists, if you could just finalize your scores for Inside Out Steel Band. This will actually take us to the end of our morning session. We worked through the morning session a bit quicker than we initially scheduled, but we want to make sure that we come back for the afternoon, since the applicants that are being reviewed in the afternoon were informed that they're going to be reviewed in the afternoon. So we will just go ahead and take an extended lunch. So I'm going to ask that we all come back around 12:50. And then we will continue the session at 1. But this will be the end of our our morning session rather. So we have a little extra time to stretch our feet and get some coffee and nourish ourselves before we come back at 1 and review the second half of the day. Great. Well, hello, everyone. You are tuned in to the afternoon panel of the NEA Arts Education Relief Grant. This is panel 2 for applicants with organizational names starting with F through Z. If you meant to attend the arts education panel with organizations that start with A through E, that is being hosted currently on Zoom, and you can find that at our Cultural Arts Division webpage, also at bit.ly/Austin Arts Grant. That's bit.ly/Austin Arts Ed Grant, all lowercase. And there you will see the links for both panels. You would want to select the panel 1, which was A through E. So yeah, this is we're entering our live panel session. Every panelist has already read and scored the application. They may change their scores today during the session if they feel the need to, and scores will be finalized at the end of the day. We will be taking 10 minutes max per application. As we approach the deadline, I will be giving 2-minute warnings and a 30-second warning so that the panelists can finish their thoughts. If there are any tech issues, we will stop the clock so that doesn't dip into the time allotted for the review. Panelist comments, we will ask them to not repeat comments. They are also not scoring on consensus. They will not be providing any numeric scores. They will just be providing overall application comments that should align with their review criteria and should be guided by the rubric that was provided to them. If a panelist has a conflict of interest, they will be recusing themselves. They will be turning off their camera and will not be commenting on any application in which they have a conflict with. So with that said, we're going to start the afternoon session. The first here in the afternoon session is, the first applicant rather, is Texas Empowerment Academy. The primary for Texas Empowerment Academy is Lydia, and the secondary will be Samantha. So Lydia, when you're ready.
Thank you. Texas Empowerment Academy is a pre-K through 12 charter school founded in 1998 to ensure all students, regardless of labels, are able to thrive academically and socially according to the organization's application and documentation. The Academy's primary and secondary campuses are located in East Austin and serve a primarily Black student population. The application's history of service specifically hones in on the school's music department, led by brothers Bliss and Willie Knowles since 2011, and detailed how the number of students participating in band has grown over the past decade, and the performance opportunities these students have had include at South by Southwest, Houston Tillotson and Homecoming, and partnerships with groups like Black Boys of Joy, AGB, and Saul Paul. This application scored in the mid-range for me, according to the rubric. I felt the application would have been strengthened with more specifics about expanded ADA accessibility beyond federally mandated guidelines, as well as more information about language accommodations. It would have also been supportive to have more details and biographies about cultural leadership at the school, though the school's website did offer more information in this area. Additionally, the budget, while offering a detailed breakdown of expenses for a variety of instruments, uniforms, music production expenses, and auditions, did not account for teaching artist compensation, and a key element of our rubric required documentation that at least 50% of grant funds would go toward teaching artists. So those are the comments that describe my feedback for this application.
Thank you, Lydia. And the secondary is Samantha.
Thank you. I agree with Lydia's comments. For me in particular, the key leadership was an area that I would say was harder to give the full score to, as only one key staff member was discussed. I would have liked to see a little bit more explanation of other members of either staff, leadership, board, community members that are kind of guiding this organization, the school, and or this project, as well as the representation of the community that they're serving. So that was missing for me there. I also agree on the ADA, or the accessibility in language, also could be expanded upon. While they said that they provided services, any specific examples would have been an area of improvement for me as well. I did appreciate their supplemental materials. However, would encourage them to really look at any other materials that they could upload to really bolster or expand upon any of the areas they weren't able to in the written response.
Thank you, Lydia and Samantha. I do just want to introduce myself for people logging in this afternoon. I realized that I failed to do that at the beginning. My name is Jen Margulies, pronounced she, her, and I am an outside facilitator just here to assist with the process and help everybody hold a focus on equity today. So this is the moment when I will ask our panelists if people have other comments that they want to bring into the conversation. So this would be strengths that you saw in the application that haven't yet been discussed, or areas of improvement that we might not have discussed yet. Anything that came to light in your review that you would like to bring into the conversation?
For me, this application did score on the lower end in relationship to the rubric. For me, for similar reasons that have been mentioned, the accessibility in the disability community, and also the language accessibility. There wasn't documentation about any of that. And the cultural leadership, for me, I wasn't able to score high because not enough detail was written about enough of the leadership. And that is why the application scored on the lower end for me.
Thank you, Allison. Anything else, other strengths that you noticed that we haven't mentioned yet, or areas for improvement that you want to bring to light? All right, thank you. I do also just want to take a moment to remind folks who weren't watching in the morning, as Jesus said, reviewers have been asked to score applications against the rubric. So that means in reference to the funding priorities and guidelines. And they are not scoring them in relation to or in comparison to one another. I think we can move on unless folks have other comments on this applicant.
Great, thank you, Jen. And yeah, I'm sorry, I meant to introduce you there at the beginning. I also want to acknowledge we have a Brent from Mind Pop on this panel who's here because they're going to be our contract grant administrators for the Arts Ed grant. So in case you also see them on screen here. Next application up is the Vortex, and I believe on this particular application we do have a conflict of interest from our from our facilitator here. So Jen's going to turn their camera off, and the primary on the Vortex will be Andre, and the secondary will be Allison. So Andre, whenever you're ready, I'll start the timer.
Great. The Vortex is a nonprofit organization engaging in radical transformation through edge-walking artistic creations. And they do this through a combination of workshops, classes, and performances. Since 1991, they have been creating theater opportunities for at-risk youth as well. And their application is for funding to be able to support a year-round youth theater program by utilizing the funds to primarily hire teacher artists and scholarships for the attending students. Their history, so the strengths that I saw for the application is that their history of service for me was indicated fairly strong intentionality for communities at risk of erasure. specifically the Youth Action Ensemble and the kind of social justice issue component of that programming. Though something that I do think would help in the history of service could be that this section in the future would include the cultural makeup of the students that are participating in that program, just to have a clear understanding of who the program directly benefits. Their accessibility score initiatives also were very strong in the application. They were very thoroughly documented. I think the cultural leadership section might be a place of improvement just by including some of the cultural knowledge and understanding of their leadership, in addition to the accolades. There are a lot of accolades listed for the leadership, but just having a better understanding of their experience with their key constituencies. And then also the budget, I was able to score on the higher end, though. There was a little bit of confusion just because some of the numbers didn't quite add up to the amount that was being asked for, but it was very clear that there was a priority for teaching artists in their budget.
Thank you, Andre. And Allison, if you'd like to add.
I would say I echo what Andre has shared. For me, the application was strong in accessibility and language accessibility. And then similarly, I could see improvement with more written about their cultural leadership. While they painted a really great picture of who works there, details around whether or not those individuals had like a lived or deep cultural understanding of those key constituents was not depicted. And so for that reason, I wasn't able to award higher points in alignment with the rubric.
Thank you for your comments, Allison. And I want to go and open it up to any other panelists that would like to give some feedback or comments.
I concur with what's been shared already, but I also just wanted to say that I really appreciated their supporting documentation. It helped to see, media always helps to make these programs and experiences come alive.
Thank you, Lydia.
I just wanted to add in relation to the budget, I agree with what Andre said. In another portion of their application, they referenced paying the young artists and providing stipends and meals. I didn't see that reflected in the budget, but I agree that Andre mentioned there was a strong commitment to teaching artists and artistry, and a special call out in that budget to that special component also would have been great to see.
Thank you, Samantha. If you just want to finalize your scores, panelists, the next application up is IAM. I believe we got Jen. Exactly. Perfect. Thank you. Jen is back in the room. And the primary for IAM is Allison, and the secondary will be Andre. So Allison, whenever you're ready to start.
From the application, IAM states that their vision for international anointed ministries is to help cultivate innate artistic abilities and talents. They contract local professional artists to teach youth and other individuals basic art techniques. They desire to create a desire to inspire people to have a love for art. Most of youth focus is on athletics, and so their goal is to help the youth have an artistic outlet to use their creative art skills as well. Against the rubric, they scored middle to low for me. A strength that I saw was in their accessibility score. They had clear details that were provided to show all the partners and contractors that they organize with to be able to offer specialized programs to be inclusive. An area and improvement that I saw in a place where I wasn't able to award the highest score was in their mission and key constituents. No clear group was being addressed or like community was being addressed or referenced. And so that's an area where I thought that they could add more clarity and detail to show if key constituencies at risk for cultural erasure and displacement were indeed being addressed, but none was written in that statement. I also felt that an area and improvement that they could add was in their cultural leadership. It wasn't clear that the cultural leadership had a deep understanding or a lived-in experience of the key constituencies, or of people who had been marginalized in other ways. And so I felt like those two areas could have been a little bit more clearly written about people and populations to make the score a bit higher.
Thank you, Allison. And I believe we have Andre as the secondary.
Yes, very similar to Allison's overview. I thought the accessibility section of this application was fairly strong, with some very great depictions of some of the proactive initiatives that they had. Similarly, I did kind of struggle with understanding the cultural makeup of the leadership. Some leadership was listed, but it wasn't quite clear just the knowledge or understanding or lived experience that they had in serving the key constituencies. Also, just to better for further improvement for the history of service, there aren't any exact dates for the programming or kind of stated outcomes for the programming. And I think that just would have overall helped get a clearer picture of what the initiatives hope to accomplish, which then could help us to understand just how exactly the organization is really benefiting the key constituencies that are trying to be served by this grant.
Thank you, Allison and Andre. Do other folks have other comments on this application? Any strengths that you want to make sure we mention here? Any areas for improvement you'd like to share?
I'd like to share in regard.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Jen.
No, please go.
I just wanted to share in relation to the accessibility question. They use language that stated that they proposed to, and then listed means of accessibility, and just an area of improvement to clarify if this is what they're proposing to do or if this is what you are implementing actively, just to provide clarity from the reader's end.
Thank you. Anyone else? Thank you.
Thank you, panelists. So if you could just finalize your scores for IAM. And we will move on to the next applicant, which is Small Wonders Entertainment. And for Small Wonders Entertainment, Samantha will be the primary and Lydia is the secondary. So Samantha, whenever you're ready, let me know and we'll start the clock.
Thank you. Small Wonders Puppet Theater is a program of Small Wonder Entertainment, and they provide performances and education in the world of puppetry and music. Programs include interactive musical reviews, puppet making workshops, teacher workshops, and courses that explore global puppetry, focusing on puppets of India, Indonesia, Africa, Asia, Mexico, and Western Europe. For me, the strengths in this application were really a love for what they do that was extremely evident in their responses. The work is clear and the benefits to students are clear, and the leadership detail was really helpful. Areas of improvement is that I found the responses in the mission and the key groups served were a little vague, and would encourage specificity in regard to the specific groups served through their work. I found that the lack of clarity made it more challenging to know that if the leadership and board actually is reflective of the full scope of who they're serving, because I didn't have a clear understanding of who they were serving. I also saw an area of improvement in the budget, that it was proposed on an annual scale instead of how they would utilize the specific funding if awarded. So whether that in terms of showing an annual budget and then showing how they plan to use this particular funding, that was unclear for me in reading. Would encourage a little more specificity there as well.
Thank you, Samantha. Lydia?
So I agree with what Samantha's shared, and I was not able to score this as high as possible according to the rubric. Though it's clear that this organization serves students from many different backgrounds, including at Title I elementary schools in Austin ISD, and I do have firsthand knowledge about this, as per our rubric and based on the application, the organization's mission is not explicitly rooted in serving communities at immediate risk of cultural erasure and displacement within and underfunded by the City of Austin Cultural Arts Division, which would have resulted in that higher score according to our rubric. I appreciated how the applicant clearly described and made transparent the identities of those who hold power in the organization. As per our rubric, the score for me reflects that some of the applicant's administrative and creative leadership have a deeply rooted cultural understanding and lived experience within key constituency groups that experience forms of institutional marginalization. And like Samantha shared, although the budget for me was detailed and specific, less than 50% of the proposed award would be going toward teaching artists as documented in the application. And that also was kind of a key element of the rubric that would have led to a higher score.
Thank you both. Are there other comments, other perspectives folks want to share? Andre, you're unmuted. Is that?
Yes, I'd like to add also an area of improvement that I saw for this application was in accessibility. There was very clear language of an intention to support and be cognizant. However, there were not really concrete examples that were given. And so I think just one or two concrete examples of how they proactively tried to engage in this area would definitely allow us to score this on a higher scale.
Thanks for that feedback. Other comments, strengths that you saw that we haven't mentioned yet, or areas for improvement you'd like to suggest? All right. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, panelists. If you can just finalize your scores for Small Wonders Entertainment. And the next application we will review is Texas Music Museums, Inc. For Texas Music Museum, Inc., Lydia will be our primary and Samantha will be our secondary. So Lydia, whenever you're ready, you can go ahead.
Thanks, Jesus. Texas Music Museum, according to their application, was incorporated in 1984 and received its 501c3 status in 1985 with the mission of highlighting the contributions of Texas musicians to the musical heritage of the nation and the world. The organization has a current special focus on amplifying awareness of Austin's Black and Mexican American and Tejano musicians and is proposing outreach to Title I schools with free bilingual programming to educate students about lesser-known East Austin musicians. This application, for me, scored in the mid-range of the rubric. Based on the available documentation and application, it appears the organization has evolved to serve and preserve the histories of key constituencies at immediate risk of cultural erasure and displacement, and those experiencing other forms of institutional marginalization, specifically through their focus on lesser-known Black and Mexican American musicians, and expanding access to underserved community members through partnerships with museums that do explicitly focus on these communities, like the Carver Museum and Mexican American Cultural Center, and through free programming. However, it wasn't clear that this focus was essential to its founding and mission, which would have led to a higher score per the rubric. I know that the application addressed how many different musical genres were represented in the museum from its founding, but really parsing out who was documented in those different genres at the outset would have helped with that component of the rubric for me. I thought that the application was strengthened with its examples of accessibility efforts, particularly accommodations for individuals with disabilities and their partnerships with organizations and interpreters. The budget did offer specific details about costs, but it did not indicate that at least 50% of the award would go toward teaching artists. Based on what was described, more than 50% of the proposed award outlined in the budget is proposed to go towards rent and AV expenses, which did not align with the highest possible score in our rubric.
Thank you, Lydia. Samantha?
I agree with Lydia's comments and want to just also highlight a moment of strength in the application for me, which was the reference to the technology that they use in terms of language accessibility, which was really helpful. They identified clear tools and resources that they use to achieve this, so I appreciated that. I agree that the budget was an area of improvement for me as well. That while it was very detailed, the teaching artists and programming itself implementation was not at the 50% mark in relation to our rubric.
All right, thank you both. Other comments or perspectives, things that people would like to bring to light in your review of strengths, areas of improvement for this application? Joy.
Yes, this application scored on the higher end for me. I led primarily through a very strong application through cultural leadership. I thought they were very clear with the board and how diverse the board was, including specifications for how that diversity makeup existed. That also, to me, communicated or led into the other parts of the organization's application through history of service and through mission and key constituencies. I would also echo that the weakest point of the application for me was in the budget area. I think that could definitely be improved with just more specifics.
Thank you for your feedback. Other strengths or areas of improvement that anyone wants to discuss that we haven't mentioned yet? All right, thank you.
Okay, thank you, panelists. If you can please finalize your score for Texas Museum Inc. Or sorry, Texas Music Museum Inc. And the next applicant will be Undercover Superheroes. For Undercover Superheroes, we have Andre as the primary and Samantha as the secondary. So whenever you're ready to go, Andre.
Great. Undercover Superheroes is a nonprofit seeking to merge creativity, technology, and collaboration to ignite sustainable change and economic development through their Dreams Over Dollars Foundation. The application is for funds to fund an industry event geared towards professionals to help curate solutions to alleviate the downturn in the music industry. Some areas that I thought the application was fairly strong was the mission is very descriptive in what they overall plan to do and the goals that drive this organization. Though it doesn't specifically name any communities at risk of erasure. This may be in part because it does appear that the organization is newer, but because of that, I wasn't able to score this section particularly high just because it wasn't very clear who exactly specifically they were serving in their organization. The cultural leadership area also could be improved by just including more details of the leadership. Many leaders are listed in their specific roles, but the understanding or the lived experience of the key constituencies isn't quite clear or reflected just in the information that was provided in the application of their leadership. And then another area just that could be strengthened is in the budgets. There were not just concrete numbers listed in the budget, so it made it really difficult to assess how specifically the funds would be used in this particular event that was being planned to be funded. And that the majority of those funds would go towards teaching artists. Mention of hiring local artists was included in the budget, but there weren't any concrete details for that.
Thank you, Andre. Samantha, you're the secondary.
I agree. The specificity around the key leadership provided in the application was a listing, and that was really helpful. However, really knowing their relationship or how they are reflective of the community or representative of the community was an area that I wanted of improvement for me. I also found the information in the application in regard to accessibility could have provided a little bit more clarity. For me, the application mentioned working with organizations and presenting at venues that were ADA accessible, but any additional details beyond ADA requirements and how they and their work provide accessibility modifications or accommodations, would have been an area of improvement to see in their response in the application.
Thank you both. Other reviewers, do you have other comments that came to light in your review, other strengths, areas of improvement, any other perspectives that you'd like to add to the conversation?
An area of improvement for me would have been around the language accessibility. They reference having a bilingual staff member, but it's not really clear as to how that supports the organization or programming. And so being more clear about how that directly impacts the accessibility accommodations that are beyond upon request only would be really helpful in strengthening that score.
Thank you, Allison, for that feedback. Are there areas of improvement or strengths that you all saw that haven't been brought to light yet? And I think Seuss did mention this earlier, that there's no need for the panel to come to consensus, that each score is taken individually, but all the panelists did review each application, and so all the feedback that you all have to offer is valuable. So much. I think we're ready to move on.
Thank you, everyone. If you just could finalize your scores for Undercover Superheroes, and next will be Leap of Joy. For Leap of Joy, we have Allison as the primary and Lydia as the secondary. So Alice, you can go and start when you're ready.
Leap of Joy from their application states that their mission is to empower and enhance the lives of at-risk children and youth. Their constituents are children. They serve in low-income areas of Austin. And quote, initially we set out to give little girls in Title I schools an opportunity, a ballet creative movement dance class with costuming and performances. We incorporate SEL and Texas Essential Knowledge and Skills. Our students are approximately 80% Latin, 15% Black, and 5% mixed race, Asian and white. They are all sizes, shapes, and colors and are included without judgment. For me, this application, I was unable to award the highest scores. For me, a strength that they had was that in their mission, they do claim to serve populations that have experienced other forms of marginalization, and they list that as low socioeconomic communities, and they provide ways that they're disrupting and making an impact in that community. Areas of improvement for me were, in regards to the rubric, areas that they could strengthen the application was in the budget. I felt that they could add more detail to provide clarity. Per the rubric, 50% of the awarded money needed to be going to teaching artists in order to score really high. And from the written response, that wasn't evident. Another area that I was unable to score this application in a high score was around the language portion. While bilingual teachers are referenced, it doesn't clearly translate what that would mean bilingual programming or any details about how they are making their program more language accessible for students. Another area that I felt could be improved, or they could add more languaging around, and that I wasn't able to award the highest points, was specifically in the history of service portion. They did talk about their community, but there was languaging in there that I felt impacted the statement in a way that was not positive. The languaging referenced and made assumptions about the community, and I felt like that could have been removed to strengthen the application. It'd be helpful, sorry, for me to quote that.
I think it's probably better not to, actually. Okay. But I think that you've been pretty clear about like where the applicant can find that, so they can take a look at that and use that feedback for improvement in the future. I was actually going to thank you for your sensitive way of addressing that, Allison. Did you have anything? Oh, go ahead, Jesus. I was just going to ask Allison if you had any other comments or if we were ready to move on to the secondary.
I'm ready to move on to the secondary.
Okay. And Lydia, I believe you're the secondary on Leap of Joy.
Okay. I sincerely appreciated their supporting documentation, as videos do help to bring this work to life. I was not able to score this application as high as possible according to the rubric. The organization's mission is rooted in serving communities that experience forms of institutional marginalization, like Allison shared, but didn't necessarily detail key constituency groups at immediate risk of cultural erasure and displacement. Documentation provided shows that reaching underserved communities is central to the applicant's mission, and I do have firsthand knowledge about their efforts to serve Austin ISD schools. Some of the applicants' leadership have a cultural understanding and lived experience within the key constituency groups as defined by our rubric, but not the majority, which would have led to a higher score. I thought the application would have been strengthened with specific names and brief biographies of their team members. And I also noted that the proposed budget focused on salaries for administrators, and the application acknowledges that each of these staff members are artists themselves. However, the budget doesn't indicate that 50% of the grant award would go toward cost of teaching their programs. Those were my notes.
Right. Thank you, Lydia. Other comments from other panelists, strengths that you noted that we haven't discussed yet, or areas for improvement you'd like to suggest that haven't come to light yet? All right. We have asked, just for folks who are watching, that panelists do share any feedback or comments that they have that are not repetitive of comments that have already been made. Thank you all.
Yes, thank you, panelists. And if you can finalize your score for Leap of Joy. And we're going to jump into the next application, which is Fistera Projects. It may be listed in your materials as Fistera Studios, but it's the same application. The primary for this is Lydia, and the secondary will be Andre. So Lydia, whenever you're ready to begin.
According to the application materials, Fistera Projects is an educational nexus for interdisciplinary projects that promote personal and social well-being in Austin through the arts and technology. As described in the materials, the organization's mission is rooted in serving communities that are at immediate risk of cultural erasure and displacement within and underfunded by the City of Austin Cultural Arts Division. Documentation provided shows that reaching underserved communities is central to the applicant's mission, and the application outlines that they served mixed ability students in East and South Austin through a process of introspection, expression, and play, and seek to inspire youth to greater trust, satisfaction, and prosperity through connectedness to their community, place, and purpose. The application mentioned that their artists identify as Latinx, Black, Asian, Romani, Arab, LGBTQ+, or are immigrants and refugees. They collaborate with organizations like ArtSpark, Texas School for the Blind and Visually Impaired, We Can Dance Blind, and a prosthetic engineer. They also partner with Texas Can Academy in East Austin and have university and international partnerships for mentorship programs and internships. The application outlines how teachers affiliated with Fistera have a long history of service in Austin, but the response for me did not necessarily elucidate how Fistera specifically, since its founding, had a history of serving the key constituency groups defined in our rubric. The application mentions how their efforts at addressing inclusion and diversity to reach non-English speaking communities have not stopped at the level of outreach, but include relationship building and support. And The application clearly detailed how funds will be used, including for compensation of teaching artists as required by our rubric. So this application received a higher score from me.
Thank you, Lydia. And Andre, if you'd like to add.
Yes, very similarly, this application scored on the higher end for me. The some areas of strength were definitely in the mission and key constituencies. I thought they provided very clear, concrete numbers and examples, so that made it easier to gauge the impact of the organization. An area that I think could just benefit from more clarity is in the history of service. There is a lot of accolades mentioned, although from the language, it's a little unclear if the accolades are directly correlated to Festera or if these were things that the leadership accomplished maybe individually on their own, and they're just kind of including an overall view of initiatives that have been accomplished. But yes, yeah, so on the whole, I believed that the application was very clear in that it serves many of the key constituencies that seek to be assisted by the grant, and the budget in particular as well was very clear and indicating that the majority of funds would go towards teaching artists.
All right, thank you both. Any other comments, areas that you found something to note that you haven't heard mentioned yet so far? Strengths, areas for improvement? In place you found a perspective that is different than what you've heard mentioned. All of those are great to bring into the conversation, the benefit of our applicants. I see you all looking through your comments, and I appreciate you doing that. It seems like folks don't have, oh, go ahead, Samantha.
I apologize if this was mentioned. It's just something I noted in the application that they stated that they listed artists and they were noted their impact and power within the organization and or their cultural understanding or lived experience could have been expanded upon for me as an area of improvement.
Thank you for bringing that up. Thanks for that feedback. All right. Like that, might be ready to move on, Jesus.
Thank you, everyone. So if you could just finalize the scores for Festera projects. The next application we will review is Meshikarte Museum. For this, Samantha will be our primary and Allison will be the secondary. Wait for the slide to update here. Here we go. And Samantha, whenever you're ready to begin.
Thank you. Meshikarte Museum is a long-standing organization founded in 1984 with the goal of serving their community and uplifting Mexican art and culture. Their proposed project is their Screen It program that hosts artist services at a proposed 3 schools, though the program itself has occurred at many more. Screen It introduces children ages 9 to 17 to the principles and art of screen printing through designing their own images, and in doing so, learn about the technical aspects of the craft itself, new screen printing technology, and screen printing's cultural history. In my opinion, I found this application to be very strong. The application itself and their responses demonstrated in specificity their key constituency groups, and not only how they are serving their mission as an organization and through their programming, but how the programming itself continues to support that mission. The application also demonstrated this impact and service in their leadership. I appreciated the data, the application and responses provided in regarding to the population itself, which in turn helped in understanding the need, impact, and their own organization's mission and urgency. I also found that the application's statement regarding their commitment to diversity through sustained and deliberate investment in uplifting community was really strong as well. Their uploaded budget was extremely detailed and thorough, indicating, as required in our rubric, that 50% would be allocated towards teaching artist services. Their narrative budget in their response did not include any numbers or figures. So it really was in those supplemental materials where they uploaded the budget. Just an area of improvement to perhaps mention that in the narrative, because at first I did not award them the full score as high as I could because it wasn't outlined in the, they had uploaded a budget separately, but the budget that they did upload and provide was extremely detailed.
Thank you, Samantha. Allison?
I echo Samantha's sentiment. For me, this application scored really high in regards to the rubric. A particular strength for me was the mentioning of the key constituents that are at immediate risk for cultural erasure and displacement. They really specifically named the Latinx community, and the areas in the city which they're targeting to interrupt that displacement. I am also echo the sentiment on cultural leadership, and that they really explicitly name and highlight that they are one of the few U.S. museums founded and directed by people of color. So they painted a really clear picture in cultural leadership, and also in their history of service. And then a strength for me was in their language accessibility. They really talk about the impact that having bilingual material makes in a community, and how it like translates to beyond just the language, but culture being valued. And so that painted a really clear picture on the impact of what they're doing for language accessibility.
Wonderful. Thank you both. And before I ask for additional comments, I just wanted to check in with you, Samantha, about something that you had said about the budget. So you had said that you would notice that there was a discrepancy between the detail you could find in the narrative budget and the uploaded budget, but you were able to find the information that you needed in the uploaded budget. Is that correct? And so that would be what is reflected ultimately in the scoring.
That's correct.
Okay, great. Thank you for clarifying that. And outside of that clarification, do other panelists or does anyone have anything to offer in terms of strengths that you saw, areas of improvement? Yeah, Lydia.
Sure. I'll speak. I concur with what's been shared so far. This application also received a high score from me against the rubric. In particular, though, in the individuals with disabilities section, I did see an opportunity for strengthening a future response. I thought that the response in the application showed thoughtfulness toward ensuring how all learners can participate in the ScreenNet program, which may be their first experience with this type of program. But specific details weren't provided to show how the activities were adapted, or different services were provided for individuals with disabilities. So I thought the application would have been strengthened with more details or evidence about how the program design currently or in the past has ensured that students with disabilities could participate fully.
Thank you for that feedback. Are things that folks notice, strengths that you saw in the application or areas of improvement that we haven't yet discussed? just different perspectives that you want to offer. All right. Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone. So if you want to finalize your scores for Meshik Arts and Museum, and we will pull up the next application, which is Outreach Productions. For Outreach Productions, Andre will be the primary and Samantha will be the secondary. So Andre, you can start whenever you're ready.
Okay, great. Outreach Productions is a nonprofit literary-based organization committed to enriching the lives of marginalized and underserved communities in the Austin area. They do this primarily by nurturing literacy, fostering library engagement, and instilling empowerment through innovative programs. The application is for funds to support teaching artists for their already well-established and effective education activities. Some areas of strength for the application that I noticed was that it's very clear in their mission and in their history of service that that communities at risk of erasure are central not only to their current initiatives but also to their founding. I also did score in the higher end for accessibility. It's clear that they've been very proactive through specifically language and making sure that there's multiple language, non-English language programming offered. Although I do think that the application could benefit just from some more concrete examples of proactive initiatives, specifically for just accessibility in general. And then it was clear also that the funds would primarily go towards teaching artists. In fact, the majority of it would be going toward teaching artists. And so within the rubric, that qualified for a higher score as well.
Thank you, Andre. And Samantha?
I agree with Andre's comments. I also wanted to point out a point of strength in this application for me was also the many different spaces, types of places and organizations that their programs exist in. I also agree that the founding of the organization through a dire need for representation and access for the community at risk of cultural erasure was a really strong point for me. And I also really appreciated the work samples that were provided. An area of improvement that I found that in their key leadership, that while representation from many groups was evident in the application, some further explanation or noting of either lived experience or representation of the direct communities could have been a little stronger from my perspective.
Thank you both. Any other feedback that folks have to offer? Other strengths you saw, areas of improvement that haven't been discussed?
Sorry, I just wanted to clarify one thing for accessibility. It was just around the language. It seemed to imply that these were things that were intended to be implemented. It was clear from other parts of the application that things had been done, but just some changing around the language to make it clear that these were initiatives, proactive initiatives that have already happened.
Thanks for that clarification, Andre. If there's no other feedback, then I think Jesus will turn it back to you.
Thank you, everyone. So yeah, we just asked that you finalize your scores for Outreach Productions. And the next applicant will be Illuminate Choirs. Primary is Allison, and the secondary on this will be Lydia. So yeah, Allison, when you're ready to begin.
Illuminate Choir, from their application, states that their mission is dedicating to nurturing a community of young singers through artistic expression, intellectual development, and a pursuit of musical excellence. Their vision is to be a leading youth choir in Austin and in the United States. They are recognized for their excellence, innovation, and service to inspire through the power of music to create a community where all are welcome, engaged, and supportive, and to make a positive impact in their singers' families and the listeners through their music. They cite city collaborations with professionals in the community that help engage in their programming that is for the community. For me, this application, I was unable to award a high score. Strength that I did find in their application was in their accessibility for individuals within the disability community, and they provided specific examples. An area where I was unable to award high points based on the rubric was key constituencies. They speak really generally about the impact in the greater Austin area and how it's for all people. And in relation to the rubric, the high score focuses on key constituencies that are rooted in serving communities that are at immediate risk for cultural erasure and displacement, and the application didn't state that they were serving those specific communities. Another area that I felt could be strengthened in relation to the rubric was the history of service. Again, their mission and their history of service is not specifically rooted in serving those communities at risk for cultural erasure and displacement, and it doesn't show that they've grown to, again, serving those communities either. And so for that reason, I wasn't able to award them a high score.
Thank you, Allison. And the secondary is Lydia.
I also wasn't able to score this application as high as possible according to the rubric. I appreciated the supporting documentation. It's been a common refrain for me today, but any videos showing the work and the impact that an organization is having on kids is amazing. The application shared how all are welcomed in the choir, as Allison was saying, and a percentage of choir members receive reduced or free tuition. However, according to the application documentation provided, serving populations that are part of the priority constituency groups for this funding opportunity was not an explicit stated mission or vision of the organization. Some of the applicants' leadership have a cultural understanding and lived experience within constituency groups defined by our rubric. I thought that the application would have been strengthened with some brief biographies of their board members and more information about how the organization's leaders represent the Austin communities they serve. Though the application didn't provide specific figures, it did stipulate that 50% of the award will go towards staff. And I thought the application would have been strengthened by parsing out whether the staff salary funding would go specifically to those who are teaching students, or whether administration work was also encompassed in the staff salary component. So more clarification there would have helped reach a higher score for me in this rubric.
Thank you both. Any other perspectives or any feedback that folks would like to add to the discussion about this application? Samantha.
I would just add that in the application, it was stated a certain percentage of serving economically disadvantaged, as the application stated, students, but really digging into some specificity around the communities and those students that they're serving, I think would have provided further clarity, and not just in the mission and key constituency response, but throughout the application as well.
Thanks for that feedback. Anything else people want to bring into the conversation that we have not already discussed? Any other strengths or areas for improvement that you saw? Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, everyone. If you can just finalize your scores, and that takes us, we're about a little past halfway through our afternoon session. So we may take a 15-minute break just to get up and stretch a little bit, some water and whatnot. So we should expect to meet here again. Let's maybe try to all get together around like 2:12. Thank you, everyone. Again, you are watching the Arts Education Relief Grant panel. This is panel 2 for organizations that start with F through Z. There is another panel currently happening on Zoom for panels applications with organizations that start with A through E, and that can be found on our Cultural Funding's website. There are links for both panel reviews there. Additionally, you can find that at bit.ly/Austin Arts Ed Grant. That's bit.ly/Austin Arts ED Grant, all together lowercase. And that will take you also to the link in which you can find both of the review panels. So with that said, we will go ahead and jump into the next panel for the day, which is the Kitchen Diva Health Outreach/Book Boosters. The primary on this is Lydia, and the secondary is Andre. So Lydia, whenever you're ready, we'll start the clock.
Thanks, Jesus. Book Boosters' mission, according to the application, for over 36 years has been to provide free creative writing, art projects, theatrical performances, and storytelling presentations to low-income students in underserved school districts in Austin-Travis County, based on the works of authors Angela Shelton-Medeiros and Michael Medeiros. The organization is under all-Black leadership, composed of members born and raised in East Austin or longtime residents of East Austin. Ms. Medeiros is an award-winning author. Texas Monthly Magazine named her one of the most influential children's writers in Texas. Based on her own childhood experience reading books and not seeing herself represented, Ms. Medeiros' work intentionally tells the stories of Black protagonists and features people of color to increase representation in literature. The application scored in a higher range, according to the rubric for me. It outlined how award monies would be focused on implementation of her latest work, Skin Deep, specifically writing workshops and play performances based on this book. The budget offered proficient details to clearly understand all components and included a separate section for administrative fees. This helped to show how the project budget includes at least 50% of the award going toward teaching artists and those involved in their workshops and performances, which was a key marker of a high score in the rubric. The application would have been strengthened for me with more information about how the organization seeks to expand ADA accessibility in their programs beyond federally mandated requirements. And those are my comments.
Thank you, Lydia. Andre, if you'd like to add.
Yeah, I would definitely like to echo that this application scored on the higher end for me as well. It was very clear from their mission statement that the organization grew out of a need for representation, and their programming is clearly geared towards members of the communities at risk of erasure or displacement. For a measure of improvement that I noticed is that it would be helpful to know the cultural makeup or the economic status of the schools that the programming has taken place in. There's a lot of different organizations and partnerships mentioned, but there's not a whole lot of cultural understanding of those partnerships. It would also benefit in the accessibility section to include any additional proactive initiatives. The budget did outline some interest and investment in this area, but it seems that this is an important aspect of the organization, and just having more concrete examples of how that's played out in the past would also help to improve the overall score.
Thank you both. Are there any other areas of strength or areas for improvement or other perspectives that you all would like to bring into the conversation as we discuss this application?
Just wanted to add in regard to the budget, the application did outline artistic fees, and from my perspective, further clarity on how much of these fees are specifically for teaching artists, especially in according to the rubric, the 50% would have just provided additional clarity from my perspective.
I was just looking at my notes. I echo Samantha's thoughts about the budget in alignment with the rubric needing more clarity. I made a similar note about artistic fees, but not being clear as to those specifically going to teaching artists and how much of that.
Thank you both for your feedback. Anything else, other comments that folks want to make sure come into this conversation while we're discussing this applicant? I will just repeat, those of you who've been watching all day will have heard me say this before. Those of you who just came on after the break might be new, that all panelists do review all applications, and we simply ask panelists to share comments that have not already been mentioned so that we're not repeating anything in the conversation. Looks like it's ready for you, Jesus.
Thank you all. So if you could just finalize the scores for the Kitchen Diva Health Outreach / Book Boosters, we will move on to the next application, which is New School of Music. For New School of Music, we have Samantha as the primary and Allison as the secondary. Samantha, whenever you're ready, I'll start the clock.
Yeah. The New School of Music's mission is to serve the greater Austin community by sharing the gift of music through connecting exceptional professional musicians with students of all ages, the goal of a lifelong study and enjoyment of music. They provide free music instruction to underserved youth in the Austin area through partnerships with public and charter schools. They were founded in 2013. This application for me was in the middle to high range. Their strengths from my perspective were their detailed information and data and who they've served, particularly through the school district itself. It helped in understanding who they are serving and how they are improving access in particular. I felt this application was strong in appreciating their supplemental materials and bios of key teaching artists. That was also helpful in understanding their leadership and their representation of these key constituency groups and the communities that they serve. I appreciated the wide scope of board members mentioned in this application and representing multiple constituency groups. However, an area of improvement is I wasn't able to score this application as high in the history of service as it seemed as while they've evolved to serve communities at risk for cultural erasure and or displacement, it appears that it wasn't rooted in their initial mission and intention, rather to supplement for the lack of funding in music education, not necessarily serve specific community groups.
Oh, sorry, Allison.
I share a lot of Samantha's sentiments about, for me, high score being around cultural leadership and mission and key constituents. Another area that was a strength for me was the accessibility. They had clear documentation on how they are partnering with families. They view families in partnership to create a more accessible program. And the other organizations and schools that they work with to make accessibility a priority. So that was a strength that I found in this application.
Thank you both. Any other feedback that could be differing perspectives where you saw something differently than what has already been mentioned? As Jesus mentioned earlier, it's not necessary for panelists to come to consensus. So people may have different opinions, and that's always helpful for applicants to hear, or any strengths or areas of improvement that we haven't yet discussed. Andre.
Yes, this application overall scored mid to high range for me. One thing I think that would just be beneficial for future reference is that some of the information in the work sample provided was linked to a Dropbox that was just difficult to get access to. And so just having the information a little bit more readily available would be beneficial for the future.
Thanks for that feedback. Anything else that folks want to add to the conversation? Looks like we're ready to move on with this one.
Okay, thank you, everyone. Just finalize your scores for New School of Music, and we will move on to Groundwork Music Project next. For Groundwork Music Project, Andre is the primary and Lydia is the secondary. So Andre, whenever you're ready, we can start the clock.
Groundwork Music Project is a nonprofit whose mission is to provide music education opportunities regardless of means. Groundwork's key constituencies are families of color in schools economically disadvantaged, and they have a history of strong relationships with their key constituencies, including partnerships with a couple of primary schools. Their application is for funds to help match payments for clients of reduced means, as well as for paying and training teaching artists. This application scored in the mid to high range for me. Some of the strengths that I saw in the application were around accessibility. Their language accessibility was fairly strong in providing music of more than just one kind of language, different styles of music, different languages of music. An area of improvement I found was within cultural leadership, as well as the budgeting outline. There's a hierarchy of power that's mentioned in the application with a board that oversees the initiatives. However, it was also mentioned in that section that there was a newly implemented multicultural initiative, which just kind of seemed to imply that these were relatively newer initiatives and not maybe central to the organization's founding to serving key constituency groups that are at risk of erasure. The language in the history of service could just be improved to showcase that it's an organization that began as a need to serve the community that it resides in. Because the language right now kind of just suggests that the organization came first, and then just by geolocation, it played a role in which communities got serviced. The budget mentions funds being utilized for teaching artists. However, the language seems to imply that the same funds might be utilized in two different ways. And so just a little bit more clarity, specifically outlining what the funds would be utilized for, could also help this application to score higher.
Thank you, Andre. And I believe Lydia is the secondary on this one.
That's right. I agree with much of Andre's comments. I wasn't able to score this application as high as possible according to the rubric. The organization does seek to provide opportunities for music education regardless of means, and the documentation provided shows that reaching underserved communities who experience institutional marginalization is central to the applicant's mission. However, serving vulnerable populations at immediate risk of cultural erasure and displacement was not part of the stated mission or vision of the organization that I could tell in the application. I thought the application would have been strengthened with more information about the organization's board members. However, this was supplemented a bit with staff information on the organization's website. I appreciated the evidence in the application of the organization's partnerships with schools, particularly with Blackshear Fine Arts Academy in East Austin. As described in the application, proposed activities didn't seem to provide expanded ADA access beyond federally mandated accessibility requirements. So that would be an opportunity to strengthen future applications. I thought that the application provided proficient details to clearly understand all components of the project budget. However, less than 50% of the award was proposed to go towards compensation for teaching artists, which had it did account for that for 50% or higher, that would have led to a higher score in that area.
Thank you both. Other comments about this application? Any strengths that we haven't discussed yet, areas of improvement that you saw, or maybe a perspective that you have that differs from what you've heard so far? see you all reviewing your comments. Thank you. Looks like we're ready to move on. Yes. Thank you all.
Great, thanks everyone. If we can finalize the scores for a groundwork music project, we will move on to the next application, Zachary Scott Theater, doing business as Zach Scott Theater. For this one, Lydia will be our primary and Allison will be the secondary. And we can start whenever you're ready, Lydia.
Okay, thank you. According to the application, Zach Theater was founded in 1932 as Austin Civic Theater, and today is a major cultural institution operating by the core values of artistic excellence, business discipline, inclusion, and a commitment to being a theater of, by, and for Austin. A significant part of the organization's work for over 5 decades, according to the application, has been engaging Austin's youth through performing arts school, family and youth theater series, and arts education residencies, with a current focus on students who attend Title I schools. I'll also say that I have firsthand knowledge about some of the work they are doing on this front, particularly to offer programs and experience at no cost to certain schools. The application included video evidence of their partnerships with schools in Austin's Eastern Crescent, which are comprised of a majority of students in the key constituency groups as defined by our rubric. Application's strengths were particularly in the areas of accessibility. They provided examples of partnerships serving neurodiverse students at Rosedale School, as well as with Texas School for the Deaf to recruit interpreters for their ASL interpreted performances. The application also shared that Zach Theater has held sensory-friendly performances. Proposed activities include specialized adaptations and services for non-English speaking communities, particularly Latina, Spanish-speaking Austinites. I wasn't able to score this application as high as possible according to the rubric for a couple of reasons. It's clear that the organization has evolved to serve key constituency groups that experience forms of institutional marginalization and those at an immediate risk of cultural erasure. But based on the application and supporting documentation, this didn't appear to be a focus of the organization from its founding, nor a stated part of their mission. The application may have been strengthened with expanded information about how the organization's core values have, or whether they have, changed over time and why. The budget lacked sufficient detail about personnel costs, like monetary figures or percentages, about how the proposed award money would be delineated to which purposes. So it was unclear whether teaching artists would receive at least 50% of the award, which was a key component of our rubric. And those are my notes.
Thank you, Lydia. And Allison, if you would like to add.
I share all of Lydia's sentiments about the strength being in accessibility. And in my notes, I highlighted all the partner organizations. Something that I felt could have strengthened the application and where I wasn't able to award the highest points was around cultural leadership. They did mention some individuals who are experiencing marginalization in other ways who are a part of those communities, but they didn't mention specifically key constituents or how their leadership was related or had a deep understanding of those who are at immediate risk of cultural erasure and displacement. And so that's an area that I wasn't able to score them the highest. Yeah, those are my thoughts.
Thank you, Lydia and Allison. Other perspectives? Anything else that you all saw in this application that you'd like to bring to light in our conversation? Strengths or areas of improvement that differ from what we've talked about so far? Andre.
A strength that I have in my notes here would actually be around cultural leadership. Towards the end of their documentation for cultural leadership, they do give a cultural makeup of their board. What's a little unclear is just how the elements of power play out throughout the organization. If the board is solely responsible for all decisions and how that those decisions are made, and I think a little bit more clarity on that would help that section to score a little bit higher.
Thank you. And just for those watching, questions related to decision making and power in an organization are part of the rubric when we think about focus on key constituencies and how cultural leadership shows up in the everyday implementation in an organization. Any other feedback that folks would like to share? All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you, panelists. So yes, please finalize your scores for Zachary Scott Theater. And we will move on to the next applicant, which is Center for Women and Their Work. This may show up in your records as just Women and Their Work. For this applicant, we have Allison as our primary and Samantha as the secondary. So Allison, whenever you're ready, you can lead us off.
Women and Their Work. The Center for Women and Their Work was founded by activists in 1978 to confront sexism, racism, and homophobia in the arts. Visual art, music, dance, theater, and spoken word. Women in Their Work grew out of and remains deeply rooted in historically underserved constituencies in Austin. Their goal has been to serve as a creative community hub for institutionally marginalized communities and create space for women's voices to be loud in Austin. Equity, diversity, and inclusion have been foundational and are at the core of our mission from our founding and throughout our 45-year history. Women in Their Work actively serves a constituency made up of creatives, BIPOC community members, artists, immigrants, LGBTQ people, East Austin neighbors, persons with disability, and organizations that also serve these constituents. We nurture engagement through the development of responsive and collaborative artist-led programming centered around visual art, exhibitions, performances, and educational programs. Using the rubric, this application scored high for me. A strength that I found in their application was in their mission and key constituencies portion. They directly named the populations at risk for cultural displacement and erasure, and they provided strong documentation and examples of all the programming that they have and that they're doing to interrupt that erasure and displacement. Another strength for me in an area that they scored high in relationship to the rubric for me was in their accessibility and for their accessibility in the community who may have disability and other languages. They write about clear partnerships that they have for impacting those communities through Austin ISD, and they also offer an array of services in Spanish, and they cite like other native tongues. An area that I felt the application would be stronger and could be awarded a higher score was in the budget. While a clear, detailed picture is painted with concrete dollar amounts, the allocation of teaching artists showed in their budget didn't meet the criteria of 50% of funds being allocated to teaching artists. And had that been a case, a higher score would have been awarded in that section.
Thank you for that, Allison. And Samantha, if you would like to add on to that.
Thank you. I echo much of what Allison said. A point of strength in the application for me was also the accessibility, but also the noting of how the space itself, how web and programmatically they're achieving their goals in the world of accessibility. An area of improvement for me was also the budget, the application could have been a little clearer around the teaching artist expenses. If any of the other staff listed are providing teaching artist expenses, that was not outlined in the application. So I also wasn't able to score as high in that area.
Sorry about that. Thank you all. Are there other comments that you would like to offer here? Again, perspectives that might differ from what's already been shared, your perspective on the application, how it met the rubric, any strengths or areas of improvement we haven't yet discussed. Lydia.
I have a couple of notes. In the cultural leadership area, the application focused on the diversity of the organization's board, and for me, the application would have been strengthened with additional information about the organization's staff. I also noted that the application would have been strengthened in the history of service area with more information about whether Black and Latina women were at the forefront of the museum's mission, vision, and activities from its founding in 1978. Because that was one of the key components of our rubric, is having that at the forefront from the founding. And I noticed on their website that they do acknowledge institutional racism and the ongoing importance of working toward a not yet fully achieved goal of reflecting the diversity of the audience they seek, particularly when it comes to amplifying the work of Black women artists. So those were two areas that I think could be strengthened in the future if there are questions in these particular areas that need to be responded to.
Thank you so much for that feedback, Lydia. Are there any other comments on this application? Things that folks notice that you want to make sure become a part of this discussion? All right. Looks like we are ready to move on then. Where are we, Jesus?
We are approaching our last application of the day, which will be Zilker Theater Productions. The primary on Zilker Theater Production will be Samantha, and the secondary will be Andre. So shortly after we finish this, we'll just some final remarks, and that'll be the end of our day, y'all. So Samantha, if you want to kick us off with Zilker Theater Productions.
Thank you. Zilker Theater Productions, as stated in their application, was founded with a resolute commitment to access to the arts and arts education. Since their inception, they have strived to offer engaging and accessible opportunities that nurture creativity and artistic expression. As community service goals evolve, they're grounded in expanding access to the arts. They believe in providing transformational experiences for all, regardless of economic backgrounds. Their education programming, they aim to provide immersive arts experiences and to foster a lifelong appreciation for performing arts. Some strengths for me that I found in this application was that their leadership was clearly defined and demonstrated how they were representative of the communities they're serving. The inclusion of roles within that key leadership were also helpful in providing greater understanding. I also appreciated the application's detail around accessibility, which detailed proactive and intentional measures that they've taken. For me, areas improvement in the application in relation to the rubric, the details of the budget of the application didn't indicate that at least 50% of the funding would be applied towards teaching artists. And having that specificity around how funds would be allocated would may have provided a higher score. Another area of improvement that I noted was that the application provided detail about programming, but for me, I was missing that specific connection being articulated about how the organization, the work, or specific projects were reaching and serving key constituency groups at risk of cultural, racial, or displacement. This detail wasn't as clear in the history of service portion of the application for me. And I wasn't able to score it as high as possible there.
Thank you, Samantha. And Andre, you're the secondary.
Yes, I have very similar notes in that the majority of the strength of the application was definitely found in the cultural leadership. That's very thoroughly illustrated and outlined, as well as accessibility. There's very thorough examples of being proactive in both of these spaces. And then as well, I do feel that I had a little less or issue with clarity on establishing that the organization was founded in serving communities at risk of cultural erasure and displacement. The history of service does imply that programming is serving these constituencies, but some of the language kind of implied that this was more of a byproduct than like a central part of the mission of the programming. And so just clearer language that this is the programming was specifically for these communities, or who this programming is specifically serving, would allow those portions of the application to score higher. And then as well in the budget area, it didn't offer any concrete numbers, so it was very difficult to gauge how exactly the funds would be allocated. And so having more concrete percentages and numbers on how those would be allocated would help that section to score higher as well.
Wonderful. Thank you both. Other perspectives or any other comments that you all want to share about what you saw as strengths in this application or potentially areas for improvement that we have not yet discussed?
Yeah, I just want to make sure this is Zilker Theater Productions and David Pontoon is the project contact name before I speak. Okay. For me, I felt like an area of improvement was around cultural leadership. And it's a place that I didn't award full points. I did appreciate how they cited their board members. I felt like a lot of the board members had some understanding in the lives of key constituents and other forms of marginalization. But for me, it didn't directly relate to the at-risk key constituencies that were referenced in the rubric, those being people who are at immediate risk of cultural erasure and displacement. And then in regards to the executive director and the artistic director and the people that they list within the organization, I didn't find that they really tied those specific people to the key constituents. And so for that reason, I didn't award them the highest possible score in the cultural leadership section.
Thank you so much for that feedback. Anyone else? Any comments that you'd like to offer? We have not already discussed about this application, I should say. Thank you all for being so thorough. I appreciate that everyone has taken the chance to look through their notes and make sure that you're raising everything into the conversation, that you have entered into the score sheets. And I'm sure that the applicants will appreciate the care that you've taken with us. And Jesus, I'll pass it over to you unless you wanted me to make some closing remarks right now.
Well, yes, let's go ahead and finalize your scores for that application. This is the end of the panel day for our Arts Ed panel, at least for organizations that are F through Z. A couple things I do just want to let applicants know if you are watching. What happens next? So awards will be announced by the end of this week. We are asking all of the panelists to submit their scores by midday tomorrow. So they'll be working on those today and hopefully tomorrow morning. And we will make announcements. Applicants may, so once we make announcements, applicants may also request comments and scores after those awards have been announced. So just want to give a kind of a what to expect next. And yes, Jen, if you'd like to make some closing remarks, this would be a perfect time to do so.
Okay, great. Thank you, Jesus, and thank you to the City of Austin for just the very intentional way that you have approached this entire funding cycle. I think that Austin is being a really a new moment, or at least a dawning building moment on some of the work that folks have been doing for a very long time to try to ensure that our city really does create equitable opportunities for representation and for creatives and for education. So my thanks to you all from the city who are leading this work. I want to thank the panelists. I think it is worth noting that each of you has taken such a respectful approach to every applicant. And I want to thank you for the serious consideration you gave to each of these thoughtful proposals from all the great organizations that have submitted for this funding. And I want to especially thank you for your attention to equity, as the city has really set out to ensure that this funding program redresses the historical disinvestment in marginalized communities that has shaped so much of what we see around us, and that this funding uplifts work that is related to and accountable to communities who are at risk of cultural erasure and displacement from our city. It's such an important shift towards an Austin that is more equitable for all. And it might be different than grant review processes that you've done before in some way. And so I want to appreciate the applicants for diving in and meeting that challenge. And I want to appreciate the panelists for giving your time and dedicated energies that we saw the results of here today, for being a part of this effort to make our city ever more beautiful, vibrant, equitable, and a place that all of us can really fully participate in. Thank you.
And I think if any, perfect, thank you.